Some of the most terrifying killers in history were women who operated in plain sight, trusted by their victims until the very end. Today, we're diving into 9 female serial killers whose crimes are so disturbing that most people have never heard their names. From nurses who poisoned babies to grandmothers who buried bodies in their backyard, these cases will shake you. One of these killers is walking free right now. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Drop it in the comments. 1. Jane Toppan. Let's start with a woman who wore the uniform of healing but used it as a disguise for something far darker. Born Honora Kelly on March 31, 1854, in Boston, she would later become known as Jolly Jane Toppan. The nickname seemed innocent enough, almost cheerful, but behind that smile was a nurse who worked at some of the most respected hospitals in Massachusetts, including Cambridge Hospital and Massachusetts General Hospital. Her colleagues saw her as friendly and dedicated. Her patients trusted her completely. None of them knew what she really was. Now, here's where things get truly disturbing. Between 1895 and 1901, Jane Toppan confessed to killing 31 people, though investigators suspected the real number was closer to 100. These weren't random victims. They were patients under her direct care, elderly and vulnerable people who depended on her for help. She specifically targeted those who couldn't fight back or call for help. And the most chilling part, she didn't kill out of mercy or even greed. She killed for pleasure. So how did she do it? Toppan would poison her victims with a deadly combination of morphine and atropine, carefully adjusting the doses to prolong their deaths. But wait, this is where it gets even more twisted. She would actually climb into bed with her dying patients, holding them close as the poison took effect. She wanted to feel them die. She later admitted that watching the life drain from their bodies gave her a sexual thrill. In her own words, she once said her ambition was to have killed more helpless people than any other man or woman who ever lived. Think about that for a second. She wasn't just a killer. She was competing to be the deadliest. Ultimately, her reign of terror ended on October 29, 1901, when she was arrested in Amherst, New Hampshire. Her trial began on June 23, 1902, at the Barnstable County Courthouse. The evidence was overwhelming, but the verdict surprised many. She was found not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of execution, she was sentenced to life at Taunton Insane Hospital, where she remained until her death on August 17, 1938, at the age of 84. She spent nearly 4 decades locked away, never showing remorse for the lives she stole while wearing a nurse's uniform. 2. Juana Barraza. Moving from New England to Mexico City, we meet a woman with 2 lives. By day, Juana Barraza was a professional wrestler known in the Lucha Libre circuit. By night, she was hunting elderly women. Born on December 27, 1957, in Hidalgo, Mexico, she became known as La Mataviejitas, which translates to the little old lady killer. She was a mother of 4, living what seemed like a normal life. But beneath that surface was a rage that traced back to her childhood, when her alcoholic mother traded her to a man for just 3 beers. She was only 12 years old. Between 2002 and 2006, elderly women across Mexico City started dying under suspicious circumstances. Investigators suspected between 40 and 49 victims. Though Barraza was eventually convicted of 16 murders, she had a system. She would pose as a government social worker or a nurse, gaining the trust of vulnerable older women who lived alone. Once inside their homes, she would strangle them with a stethoscope or whatever ligature she could find. The motive wasn't robbery, though she sometimes took small items. This was about revenge, a twisted way of punishing every elderly woman who reminded her of the mother who had betrayed her. Her killing spree ended on January 25, 2006, when a witness saw her fleeing a victim's home. Police finally had a face to match the crimes. Her trial took place in March 2008, and the verdict was clear: guilty on 16 counts of murder plus aggravated burglary. The sentence, 759 years in prison. Under Mexican law, though, she can only serve a maximum of 60 years. Today, she's still behind bars, working as a gym instructor and selling tacos to other inmates. She won't be eligible for parole until 2058, when she'll be 100 years old. Her story even inspired a Netflix documentary in 2023 called The Lady of Silence. which explores how a professional wrestler became one of Mexico's most notorious serial killers. 3. Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos was born on February 29, 1956, in Rochester, Michigan. Her childhood was brutal, filled with abuse and abandonment. By her teenage years, she was surviving on the streets, and eventually, she ended up working as a sex worker along the highways of Florida. She became known as the Damsel of Death, and here's why this case changed everything. Wuornos became the first woman to fit the FBI's profile of a serial killer, meaning she killed strangers for psychological gratification, not family members or people she knew. Between 1989 and 1990, 7 middle-aged men were found dead along Florida highways. All of them had either picked up Wuornos or stopped to help her. All of them were shot, robbed, and left on the side of the road. Their vehicles were stolen and later abandoned. At first, Wuornos claimed self-defense. She said these men had raped her or tried to rape her and she was just protecting herself. But later, she changed her story completely. She admitted she killed them for money, pure and simple. She needed cash, and these men were easy targets. She was arrested in January 1991, and her trial for the murder of Richard Mallory began on January 14, 1992. Just 13 days later, on January 27th, she was found guilty. The court handed down 6 death sentences in total. Wuornos spent over a decade on death row before she was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002, at the age of 46. 4. Irina Gaidamachuk. Irina Gaidamachuk was born on May 22, 1972, in Nyagan, a small town in Russia. She was married to a man named Yuri, had 2 children, and from the outside, she looked like an ordinary woman. But she had a severe alcohol problem, one so bad that it consumed her entire life. Her nickname, Satan in a Skirt, gives you an idea of just how terrifying she became. Between 2002 and 2010, 17 elderly women, aged 61 to 89, were brutally murdered in their homes. Gaidamachuk would pose as a social worker or a housing official, knocking on doors and offering help with paperwork or benefits. Once she gained entry, she would attack. Her weapon of choice? An axe or a hammer. Some victims were struck up to 24 times. The motive was always the same. She needed money for vodka. That's it. She would steal whatever cash she could find, sometimes just a few rubles, and then leave her victims dead or dying. At one point, she even said, "I lost count after my 10th victim." Think about that. She killed so many people that she couldn't even remember them all. Her spree ended in 2010 when one woman managed to escape and reported the attack. Police finally had a description, and Gaidamachuk was arrested shortly after. Her trial took place in February 2012 in Yekaterinburg, and on June 4th of that year, she was found guilty of 17 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Her sentence was 20 years, the maximum allowed for women under Russian law. She's currently 53 years old and still imprisoned. She'll be eligible for parole in 2032, though given the severity of her crimes, release seems unlikely. 5. Dorothea Puente. Next up is a woman who looked like everyone's sweet grandmother. Dorothea Puente was born on January 9, 1929, in Redlands, California. She dressed in vintage clothing, wore large glasses, and let her hair go gray. She ran a boarding house at 1426 F Street in Sacramento, and she seemed like a caring landlady who took in society's most vulnerable people. Elderly tenants, disabled individuals, homeless men and women. These were people living on the margins, what investigators later called shadow people. They trusted her. They had no one else. Between 1982 and 1988, at least 9 people disappeared from her boarding house, though she was only convicted of 3 murders. These weren't loud, dramatic deaths. Puente would poison her tenants with drug cocktails, particularly a sedative called Dalmane. Once they were dead, she would bury their bodies in her backyard and continue cashing their social security checks. It was a perfect scheme, really. No one checked on these people. No one noticed they were gone. In total, 7 bodies were found buried on her property. Her downfall came in November 1988 when police started asking questions about a missing tenant. They decided to search the yard, and that's when they found the first body. Puente didn't wait around. She fled to Los Angeles, where she was eventually spotted in a bar and arrested. Her trial began in February 1993 in Monterey County, and on August 26th, the jury returned a verdict, guilty of 3 murders. They deadlocked on the other 6 cases, unable to agree. She received 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. Puente died in prison on March 27, 2011, at the age of 82. Her house later became a tourist attraction, and believe it or not, someone even published a cookbook featuring her recipes called Cooking with a Serial Killer. 6. Idoia López Riaño. Idoia López Riaño was born on March 18, 1964, in San Sebastián, Spain. Her nickname was La Tigressa, which means the Tigress, and within the terrorist group ETA, she went by the alias Margarita. ETA was a Basque separatist group responsible for decades of violence in Spain, and López Riaño became one of its most deadly operatives. Her tactic? She would seduce police officers to extract intelligence, then use that information to kill their colleagues. Cold, calculated, and absolutely ruthless. Between 1984 and 1986, she was involved in the deaths of 23 people. Her targets were civil guards and military personnel. On July 14, 1986, she helped carry out the Plaza República Dominicana bombing, which killed 12 civil guards and injured 35 others. Just a few months earlier, on April 25th, a car bomb killed 5 more civil guards. Then, on June 17, 1986, she was involved in the triple murder of 3 military officers. These weren't crimes of passion, they were acts of terrorism designed to create fear and advance a political cause. She evaded capture for years, but on August 28, 1994, French police arrested her in Aix-en-Provence. Spain extradited her in 2001, and her trial took place in 2002. The verdict was guilty. Her sentence? 2,111 years in prison. Under Spanish law, she could only serve a maximum of 30 years. And here's the part that's hard to believe. On June 13, 2017, she was released. She had renounced violence and apologized to the victims' families. ETA expelled her from the organization in November 2011. 7. Genene Jones. Genene Jones was born on July 13, 1950, and she became known as the Angel of Death and the Killer Nurse. She worked as a pediatric nurse at Bexar County Hospital in San Antonio and later at a clinic in Kerrville. Parents trusted her with their most precious gift, their children, and she betrayed that trust in the worst way possible. Between 1978 and 1982, Jones was convicted of killing 2 infants, but investigators suspect the real number could be as high as 60. Her victims ranged from newborns to toddlers, the oldest being just 15 months. A study by the CDC found that patients were 10 times more likely to die during shifts when Jones was working. That's not a coincidence, that's a pattern. Her method was as cruel as it gets. She would inject babies with succinylcholine, a muscle relaxant that stops the heart, or heparin, a blood thinner that causes fatal bleeding. Why? Because she wanted attention. She wanted to be the hero who saved the day. She would create the emergency, then swoop in and try to revive the child. Sometimes she succeeded, sometimes she didn't. Either way, she got the attention she craved. Her victims included 1 5-month-old Chelsea McClellan, 1 1-month-old Joshua Sawyer, and a 4-week-old baby named Rolando Santos, who thankfully survived. Jones was arrested in 1982, and her trial took place in 1984. She was found guilty of murdering Chelsea McClellan and injuring Rolando Santos. Her sentence was 99 years plus an additional 60 years to be served at the same time. But here's where it gets complicated. Due to a Texas law designed to reduce prison overcrowding, she was scheduled for mandatory release in 2018. Prosecutors scrambled to prevent that, and in 2020, they offered her a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to the murder of Joshua Sawyer in exchange for a life sentence. She's currently imprisoned and will die behind bars. She'll technically be eligible for parole when she's in her late 82nd, but given her age and health, she's unlikely to ever leave prison alive. 8. Marianne Nölle. Germany, where a geriatric nurse named Marianne Nölle quietly ended the lives of the people she was supposed to care for. Born in 1938 in Cologne, Nölle spent years working with elderly patients. These were men and women in the final years of their lives, people who depended on her for comfort and care. She gave them neither. Between 1984 and 1992, Nölle was convicted of killing 7 elderly patients, though investigators suspected the real number was closer to 17. Her victims ranged in age from 88 to 91. One of them was an 88-year-old woman named Margaret E., who had a simple dream. She wanted to live to be 100. Nölle made sure she never got that chance. Her method was cold and efficient. She would poison her patients with Truxil, a tranquilizer that, in high doses, stops the heart. She carried out these murders over 8 years, and during that entire time, she never showed a single sign of remorse. Her downfall came in May 1991, when the son of one of her victims filed a theft complaint. That investigation led police to uncover the string of suspicious deaths. Her trial lasted 6 months and included testimony from 115 witnesses and 6 expert analysts. On April 28, 1993, the verdict came down: guilty on 6 counts of murder by poisoning. She was sentenced to life in prison, technically 2 life sentences to be served at the same time. Throughout the trial and for the rest of her life, Nölle maintained her innocence. She never confessed. She never apologized. Even the judge expressed frustration during sentencing, asking why she couldn't have given Margaret E. a chance to at least come close to her goal of reaching 100. Nölle died in prison on July 28, 2022, at the age of 84. She spent nearly 30 years behind bars, never once admitting to what she had done. 9. Elizabeth Báthory. Let's end with a case that's so old, it's become legend. Elizabeth Báthory was born on August 7, 1560, in Nyírbátor, Hungary. She wasn't just any woman, she was a countess, one of the most powerful noble women in Hungary. She lived in Castle Chaktice, which is in modern-day Slovakia, and she married Count Ferenc Nadasdy in 1575. From the outside, she had everything: wealth, status, power. But inside those castle walls, something unimaginable was happening. Between 1590 and 1610, Báthory was accused of torturing and killing young women, mostly peasant girls who worked as servants in her castle. The official count was 80 victims, but some testimonies claimed the number was as high as 650. Her methods were horrific. She would stab her victims with needles and scissors, burn them with red-hot irons, and beat them until they bled. Some girls were starved to death. Others were left outside in freezing temperatures until they died. Now, here's where the legend comes in. You've probably heard that she bathed in the blood of virgins to stay young. That story didn't appear until 100 years after her death, but the truth was bad enough without the myth. On December 29th, Count György Thurzó led an investigation and raided her castle. What they found was horrifying. Bodies, torture devices, and 4 servants who were immediately arrested. 3 of them were executed. 1 was imprisoned. But here's the shocking part. Báthory herself was never put on trial. Why? Because she was nobility. Her family was too powerful, too connected. Putting her on trial would have been a scandal that could have shaken the entire Hungarian aristocracy. Instead, she was sentenced to house arrest. They walled her up inside a room in her own castle, leaving only small slits for air and food. She lived like that for 4 years, until she died on August 21st, 1614, at the age of 54. So there you have it. 9 women who shattered every stereotype about who a serial killer can be. From nurses who poisoned their patients to a terrorist who now walks free, these cases prove that evil doesn't have a single face. It hides behind uniforms, behind smiles, behind the roles we trust most. What's terrifying is how long some of these women got away with it. Jane Toppan killed for 6 years. Marianne Nölle for 8. Genene Jones possibly killed 60 babies before anyone stopped her. And Idoia López Riaño is out there right now, living her life after taking 23 others. Which case shocked you the most? Was it the wrestling killer who targeted grandmothers, or the nurse who climbed into bed with her dying victims? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And while you're down there, hit that like button, share and subscribe if you want more deep dives into the cases that don't get enough attention. Where are you watching from? And what time is it? I'm curious to know. Thanks for sticking with me through this dark journey. I'll see you in the next one. Stay safe out there.